And those people are assigned to a particular function. They're to use their brains and their muscles to make things, to take things in nature, say a tree, and make a chair, to take a sheep and make a woolen shirt, or whatever. Then there are a lot of people in the society who are not required to do that. Some of them you can see right quickly. A 2-year-old is not going to be asked to do this thing we call work, because it's 2. And another one is 89, and for a comparable reason, we're not going to ask him or her either. So it means that in every society, Marx says, the people who do the work always have to produce more than they themselves consume. Otherwise, all the people who are part of the society couldn't survive. Somehow there has to be an excess produced by those who do the work, so that all those who don't, the children, the ancient, but lots of others, we're going to get to that in a minute, who don't do work, are supported, are provided with the food, the clothing, the shelter, without which they would die. Now, Marx says what happens in each society is they differ in how they organize that. The word, and it's a bad translation, but the word Marxists use to describe this producing more, they focus on the surplus, that the people who do work produce more than they themselves consume. In German, it's mehr. The German word is M-E-H-R, which means more in German. It's much simpler, it's clear. Surplus introduces, an old army jacket or something. It's not that. But surplus is the way it got it translated into English. So every society produces a surplus. What differs from one society to another is who produces the surplus. And who decides how big a surplus there'll be. And who decides who gets the surplus from the people who produced it to all the people who need it to live on but don't participate in producing. How do all those things get worked out? And how they do shapes the politics and the culture and the art and the music. In other words, if you want to understand the politics, the culture, the art, the music, the history, you better understand something as basic as the production and distribution of the surplus. That's called, in Marx, class analysis. The class of people who produce the surplus in relationship to the class of people who live off distributions. And just to give you an idea, to tantalize you, here's one way it can be done. The people who produce a surplus can be the people who also get the surplus. They get their own surplus, and then they sit around and decide what to do with it. And they distribute it to babies, and they distribute it to old people, and they distribute it to musicians, and whoever else they think they would like to have. While they're working in the fields, they want someone to play the mandolin, and they got to feed that one, and they got to clothe that one. So they take a portion of the surplus and they do that. But we could have a different system. We could have a system in which the people who produce the surplus, let's give them a name, slaves. Ooh, then we know who gets the surplus real quick, don't we? The master. And who decides what to do with the surplus? The master who got it. That's a very different arrangement. And you can be damn sure that that master is going to distribute that surplus differently from how the workers would have if they got their own surplus. A worker co-op is when workers who produce the surplus are the same people who decide what to do with it. And that makes it different from capitalism, slavery, or feudalism. In slavery, the slaves produce the surplus, the masters get and distribute it. In feudalism, the serfs produce the surplus and the lords get it and distribute it. In capitalism, the employees produce the surplus and the employer gets it and decides what to do with it. The revolution, the Marxist idea, says we got to get rid of this dichotomy. No more of this. We don't want the slave, we don't want the serf, and we don't want the proletarian employee either. Because we don't want a tiny minority, master, lord, employer, deciding what the surplus, what is going to be done with it when all the people have produced the surplus are excluded from that decision. That's a fundamental question. Now, farmers. Well, now you have the apparatus. Just use it for the farmer. And it turns out farmers have different class arrangements, just like everybody else. So, for example, we could have farming done by a slave and a master. That's what we had in the American South for a long time. We had cotton, for example, grown by slaves, and the surplus was taken by the masters, and they made beautiful mansions down there in Louisiana. You can see them to this day. They did what they wanted to do with the surplus. The slaves produced it, the masters decided how to use it. Or you can go to France. The peasants produced a vast surplus gathered by the feudal lords who used the surplus to construct the palace at Versailles, which you as a tourist can go visit and marvel at. What do you think the peasants who busted their ass in that time would have used the surplus to make a garden like that for 3 people to walk through every 4th night? No. No, they wouldn't have done that. Jeffrey Bezos collects the surplus from hundreds of thousands of people engaged in the monumentally important task of delivering packages. He is a package deliverer. He's the richest person on earth because obviously any rational society would want to give a vast amount of wealth to a person who delivers packages. But let's be fair, he delivers packages quickly. So of course he should have $150 billion. He's the #1 on the Bloomberg billionaires list. He recently got divorced from Mackenzie, his wife, and by the virtue of the divorce, she got $39 million, so she becomes the 22nd richest person on this planet, having been his ex-wife. Do you think, just between you and me, if the workers who produce the surplus for Amazon, all those people schlepping your package really quickly to your house, if they got together to decide what to do with the surplus that their labor had produced, you think they'd give it to Mr. Bezos so he could, by the way, one of the things he's doing, he's very excited. He's arranging planetary travel. He's going to the moon, and he's spending a fortune to develop the rockets to take him to the moon. Ooh, do you think the people who sweat in his workshops, that's what they would do? Spend the surplus to have a rocket ship take that man to the moon? My hope is that Americans looking at this situation would probably say, yes, get him out of here. Anyway, go ahead.
There was a question about unions under